It was late afternoon inside the Red Dragon Dojo, a place known for discipline, silence, and respect. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, cutting across the polished wooden floor where students practiced their forms. At the far end of the room, Chuck Norris stood quietly, observing the younger fighters with the calm eyes of a true master. Dressed in a simple black gi, his presence alone demanded respect. For years, Chuck had visited this dojo to mentor upcoming martial artists, not for fame, not for glory, but because he genuinely believed in passing down real discipline. Today seemed like a normal day, until the dojo doors slammed open with a loud bang. Every head turned. Every kick stopped midair. Every whisper died instantly. Walking in, with slow, heavy steps and a confident smirk spreading across his face, was none other than Steven Seagal. Wearing his signature long coat, dark sunglasses, and that unmistakable swagger, Steven acted like he owned the place. His entrance alone changed the energy in the entire dojo. Chuck looked up, expression steady. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched as Steven strutted across the room. Several students exchanged whispers. Is that really Steven Seagal? What's he doing here? Do Chuck and Steven even get along? Steven removed his sunglasses in a dramatic motion and scanned the room before locking eyes with Chuck. A slow grin crawled across his face. Well, he said loudly, making sure the entire dojo heard him. If it isn't the old cowboy himself. A few students stiffened. Some glanced between the two legends, sensing tension instantly. Chuck remained still. Steven, he said calmly, you're a long way from your movie sets. Steven let out a short laugh. I heard there was a dojo in town teaching real martial arts. Thought I should check if the rumors were true. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Chuck stepped forward, stopping just a few feet away from him. His tone remained light, but firm. You keep pushing people with that attitude, Chuck said, and one day someone's going to knock you out, old man. A heavy silence washed over the dojo after Chuck's line echoed through the air. You keep pushing people with that attitude, and one day someone's going to knock you out, old man. Students stared in disbelief. Some widened their eyes. Others covered their mouths. A few even stepped back, as if preparing for an earthquake. Steven Seagal wasn't used to being talked to like that, especially not by another martial arts legend. He slowly folded his sunglasses, placing them in his coat pocket with theatrical precision. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice low but venomous. Oh really, Chuck, he said. And you think you're the one who can knock me out? Chuck didn't blink. If I have to, he replied calmly. But I don't start fights. Steven's smirk widened. Good. Because I finished them. A few students whispered urgently. This is bad. They're really doing this. I thought they respected each other. Steven took a slow, heavy step forward, boots thumping against the wooden tatami floor. He stood so close Chuck could feel his breath. You know, Steven said, I always wondered why the world thinks you're unbeatable. Must be the memes, right? He chuckled. People on the internet don't know what a real fighter looks like. Chuck tilted his head slightly. Steven, this dojo is a place of discipline, not ego. Oh, so I'm the one with ego? Steven threw his arms out dramatically. You walk around here like some kung fu grandfather giving life lessons. He sneered. Let's see if you can still walk the walk. The students shifted nervously. The tension was building like a storm ready to erupt. But Chuck never raised his voice. Instead, he spoke softly, which somehow made his words hit harder. Steven, leave the kids out of this. Whatever you want, talk to me outside. Steven scoffed loudly. Outside? What? Are you afraid to be embarrassed in front of your students? Chuck's eyes narrowed just slightly, the first sign of irritation. I'm giving you a chance, he said. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. But Steven wanted a scene. He wanted dominance. He wanted power. He backed up a few steps and raised his voice to the entire dojo. You all hear that? Steven announced. Chuck Norris thinks he can knock me out. Maybe he needs to prove it. The room froze. Chuck's students looked at him for guidance. Steven's fans, or those who admired his old movies, watched with uncertain loyalty. Every camera phone in the dojo suddenly lifted into recording position, and that's when Steven made the first aggressive move. He lunged forward, not to strike, but to shove Chuck in the chest. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was meant to provoke. Chuck didn't fall back, didn't even sway. He simply absorbed it, his feet planted firmly on the ground. "Is that it?" Chuck asked quietly. "You call that a push?" Steven's nostrils flared. "I call it a warning." Chuck shook his head. "Then here's mine." For a moment, Chuck's aura changed, subtly, but unmistakably. His posture straightened. His breathing steadied. His eyes sharpened, glowing with that unmistakable warrior calm. Every student in the room felt it. They had heard legends about this feeling. Some even said Chuck's presence alone could silence an entire battlefield. Steven felt it too, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Don't tell me you're scared," Steven mocked weakly. Chuck didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than Steven's entire ego. Steven, feeling the pressure, laughed nervously and turned to the crowd. "You all know I'm a real martial artist, right?" he said. "I didn't learn from memes. I learned from masters." A student whispered under her breath. "Chuck is a master." Steven spun back to Chuck. "You think you can take me? You think your roundhouse kick still works at your age?" "I don't think," Chuck said softly. "I know." The dojo erupted into whispers again. Steven's face tightened. "You know what?" he said. "Let's make this official." He pointed to the open mat, the center of the dojo, the place where true martial artists settle differences. "Right here," Steven said. "Right now." Chuck looked at the mat, then at Steven. And just as tension reached its peak, he asked loudly so the whole room could hear, "Before anything happens, I want to know something." The dojo fell silent again. Chuck looked around at the students recording and said, "Who do you think would win, me or Steven?" Gasps washed across the room. This wasn't just a showdown anymore. It had become a moment, a legend versus legend confrontation the world would witness. Phones were recording. Students were whispering. Even Steven looked thrown off. And that's when Chuck added, "And while you're at it, tell me, which country and which city are you watching this from?" The dojo had never been this silent before. Not during belt tests. Not during sparring championships. Not even when real masters came to visit. But right now, with Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal staring each other down in the center of the room, there was a silence so intense it almost buzzed. Steven wasn't used to being challenged. Not by younger fighters. Not by old rivals. And absolutely not by someone who could disarm him with one sentence and a calm stare. "So," Steven said, cracking his knuckles loudly, "you want to embarrass yourself in front of your students? Be my guest." Chuck didn't react. He simply slid his right foot back into a classic fighting stance. Nothing flashy, nothing exaggerated, just pure discipline. His breathing stayed light, controlled. He looked like a man preparing for meditation, not a fight. Steven scoffed. "That's your stance. You're not even trying. You think this is a joke." "Steven," Chuck said quietly, "if you understood martial arts, you'd know the stance isn't the fight. The mind is." Students whispered in awe. Seagal's face, however, darkened. "Oh, trust me," Steven said, rolling his shoulders. "My mind is ready." He stepped onto the mat, his boots thudding with each step. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he pulled off his long coat and tossed it onto a bench. Underneath, he wore a dark Aikido uniform creased perfectly, as if he had planned this confrontation for years. Chuck walked calmly to the opposite side of the mat. He didn't remove anything, didn't stretch, didn't hype himself up. He simply planted his feet and clasped his hands behind his back, studying Steven like a teacher waiting for a student to finish throwing a tantrum. Steven pointed at him. "You're gonna regret this, old cowboy." Chuck raised one eyebrow. "You called me old, but you're huffing just from walking across the mat." Students stifled laughter. Steven's cheeks reddened. "You want to talk?" Steven snapped. Or you want to fight? Chuck stepped forward, now only a few meters away. I don't start fights, Steven, but I end them. A thunderbolt of excitement rippled across the room. Dozens of phones now recorded without shame. Some even began live streaming. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Steven raised his hands in his trademark Aikido posture. Let me show you how a real martial artist handles a wannabe action star. Chuck tilted his head. A real martial artist starts with respect. Steven ignored the comment and lunged forward, fast for a man his size. His hand shot out toward Chuck's wrist, aiming for a classic Aikido twist. But Chuck moved like water. In one smooth, effortless motion, he pivoted his shoulder, stepped aside, and let Steven's hand swipe air. Steven stumbled forward, surprised at how easily Chuck evaded the attack. Gasps filled the room. Steven spun around. Lucky. That wasn't luck, Chuck said calmly. That was physics. Steven tried again, this time throwing a low, sweeping kick. Chuck lifted his leg just enough for Steven's kick to pass beneath it, balancing as gracefully as a crane. Then he lowered his foot again without making a sound. Steven's eyes widened. That move wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was mastery. You're playing games, Steven growled. Chuck shook his head. No, I'm teaching. Steven roared and charged again, attempting a shoulder throw. But Chuck simply placed 2 fingers gently on Steven's arm, redirecting him just enough to make the throw collapse into a stumble. Steven nearly fell. The students couldn't hold it in anymore. They erupted into whispers. Did he just dodge all that without striking? Chuck is unreal. Steven looks lost. Steven's pride cracked. Stand still, Steven shouted. Chuck shrugged. If I stand still, you'll fall faster. Steven gritted his teeth. His breathing turned heavy. His movements were getting sloppier. His ego was fighting harder than his body. He lunged again, this time recklessly. And then it happened. Not a punch. Not a kick. Not even a block. Chuck simply placed his palm on Steven's chest and stepped forward. Steven, caught off balance, stumbled backward 3 full steps before regaining his footing. The crowd exploded. Did you see that? He pushed him like he weighed nothing. That wasn't a hit. Chuck just outbalanced him. Steven glared at the students. Shut up, he barked. None of you know real fighting. Chuck sighed. Steven, the more upset you get, the weaker you fight. Steven pointed a trembling finger at him. Stop talking like you're some monk. Fight me for real. Chuck lowered his hands. You want a real fight? Then control yourself first. Steven's anger finally boiled over. He charged with a wild, desperate strike, far from his usual controlled Aikido style. Chuck didn't dodge, didn't step back. He simply raised his hand and said, "Stop." And unbelievably, Steven stopped, not because he obeyed, but because he suddenly froze, realizing Chuck had predicted his move perfectly. Chuck's hand hovered inches from Steven's face. He could have struck him, could have humiliated him, could have ended it right there. But Chuck Norris didn't need. The arena had gone from loud to absolutely electric. What started as a heated backstage argument had now become the biggest spectacle of the night. Thousands of fans inside the venue, and millions watching online, couldn't believe what they were witnessing. 2 legends, 2 icons, 2 men who defined what it meant to be tough, now face to face. And neither of them was backing down. Chuck Norris stood tall, calm, and centered. His breathing was relaxed, his posture solid. Every inch of him radiated discipline and confidence. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, paced in slow, deliberate circles, his eyes narrow and burning, whispering something under his breath like he was preparing for a real battle. Fans around them were shouting, "Norris is going to end him. Seagal's the real deal. This is history in the making." Even the security team that had arrived didn't dare step between the 2 men anymore. They knew better. These weren't ordinary celebrities. They were warriors whose names had become legends long before social media existed. Then the tension exploded. Seagal took one slow step forward, lifted his chin, and said, "You know, Chuck, you were great once. But those days are over. You're old now. The crowd gasped. Everyone felt the disrespect cut through the air like a blade. Even people who admired Seagal felt uncomfortable. Chuck didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared at Seagal with that signature calm power that made him iconic. And then, Chuck Norris cracked the kind of smile that instantly made everyone nervous. Old, he said quietly, is what you become when you stop learning. And clearly, you stopped a long time ago. Fans screamed. Cameras shook. Comment sections across live streams exploded. Seagal's face turned red. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. He stepped even closer, just inches from Chuck's face. You really think you can knock me out? Seagal growled. And that's when Chuck said the line that became the biggest quote of the night, the line that would go viral worldwide within minutes. If you keep talking like that, I'll knock you out, old man. The arena erupted. People jumped out of their seats. Security braced themselves. Even celebrities backstage rushed to the scene to witness this moment. Steven Seagal stiffened, his ego pierced like never before. He leaned in, voice sharp and deadly. Try it. You could hear a pin drop. Both legends locked eyes, their entire histories, their achievements, their pride, all colliding in one moment. Chuck slowly raised his hands, not in a fighting stance, but in a gesture of peace. And that shocked everyone. Steven, Chuck said, you want respect? Earn it. Not with words, not with threats, with humility. Seagal wasn't expecting that. The crowd wasn't expecting that. Chuck Norris had flipped the entire energy of the confrontation without even throwing a punch. And suddenly, Seagal didn't know what to do. Before he could react, something unexpected happened, something that shifted the momentum entirely. From the side of the arena, a man shouted, Chuck is right. And then another voice. Steve, stop embarrassing yourself. Fans started chanting, Nor RIS, Nor RIS, Nor RIS. Seagal looked around, stunned. This wasn't how he imagined the night would go. He had come here to prove he was still the toughest man alive. But instead, the entire crowd was siding with the man he tried to insult. Chuck Norris slowly turned his back and began to walk away, a move that spoke louder than any punch could have. It was a sign of absolute control, a sign of mastery, a sign that fighting wasn't necessary when you truly understood strength. But Seagal? He wasn't ready to let the moment go. He clenched his fists. His breathing grew louder. He shouted across the arena, Don't you walk away from me, Chuck. Chuck stopped, turned his head slightly, and with the calmest voice possible, he said, I'm walking away because I won. And you know it. The crowd exploded again. Seagal's ego shattered. His expression twisted with frustration. He stood frozen, unable to chase, unable to fight, unable to respond. The moment slipped through his fingers like sand. And everyone watching knew one thing. Chuck Norris didn't just the voice that shut down the entire arena. The echoes of Chuck Norris's last words, I'm walking away because I won. And you know it, still floated in the air like smoke from an explosion. Fans were losing their minds. Social media was already on fire. Clips were spreading with captions like, Chuck destroys Seagal with just one sentence. The most humiliating moment of Seagal's career. But Steven Seagal wasn't done. Not even close. As Chuck calmly walked toward the hallway exit, Seagal took a few heavy steps forward, his boots thudding like warning shots. His expression changed, not anger anymore. Something worse. A bruised ego mixed with desperation. You think this is over? Seagal shouted. The crowd fell silent again. Chuck didn't stop walking, didn't turn around. That only provoked Seagal more. He snapped back. You're scared, Chuck. That's why you're leaving. You know I'd beat you. Gasps erupted. Seagal wasn't just pushing the line now. He had leaped way over it. People exchanged looks like, is he insane? Even Seagal's own bodyguards took a half step backward, wanting nothing to do with what was coming. Finally, Chuck stopped walking. The entire arena went still, waiting. He slowly turned around, the light catching his face. Not angry, not shaken, just disappointed. And somehow, that made the moment even heavier. Chuck walked back toward Seagal with the slow, powerful steps of a man who never needed to prove anything. When he reached the center of the floor again, the two stood face to face. You could feel the air tighten. Chuck finally spoke, and his voice carried across the whole arena without needing to shout. "Steven, you've spent so long pretending to be strong, you forgot what real strength looks like." Seagal's jaw tightened. Chuck continued, "And if you keep disrespecting me, you're going to find out exactly how wrong you are." The crowd roared so loudly the cameras shook. It was the first time Chuck openly hinted that he might actually fight if pushed any further. But something unexpected happened next. A young martial artist, maybe in his 20s, stepped forward from the crowd. He had been watching everything, trembling with excitement and disbelief. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Mr. Norris, you're inspiring all of us. Don't let him disrespect the martial arts." The entire arena fell quiet again. That single sentence changed the mood instantly. Because this fight wasn't just ego versus ego anymore. It was about integrity, discipline, and respect, the values both Chuck and the martial arts world were built on. Chuck nodded at the young man, then turned back to Seagal. "This is what you don't understand," Chuck said. "A martial artist doesn't threaten people. He protects them." Seagal scoffed. "Spare me the philosophy, Chuck. You want to protect these people? Then show them. Right now." Fans screamed, half out of excitement, half out of fear that this was finally about to turn into a real fight. Chuck stepped forward, chest to chest with Seagal, and said in a low, deadly voice, "You want to fight? You want me to knock you out?" Seagal didn't blink, didn't breathe. "Do it," he growled. But Chuck didn't raise his fists, didn't move his feet, didn't fall for the trap. He leaned in and said the words that would make headlines for weeks. "A real fighter knows when not to fight." The crowd erupted in awe. Seagal looked thrown off, like he had expected punches, not wisdom. His bravado cracked. His expression faltered. And then, before Seagal could respond, a thunderous voice boomed throughout the arena speakers. "Steven Seagal, stand down." Everyone turned toward the entrance. A second wave of security entered, but this wasn't normal security. Leading them was a legendary figure from the martial arts world, a man respected by both Chuck and Seagal for decades. Someone Seagal would never dare challenge. He walked between them like a general entering a battlefield. His presence was so powerful, even Seagal's shoulders dropped. He pointed at Seagal first. "Enough. You've embarrassed yourself, and all of us, tonight." The crowd gasped again. Then he looked at Chuck and said respectfully, "Thank you for showing restraint. That's real mastery." Chuck nodded, humble as always. Seagal had nothing to say. He looked like a balloon that had finally deflated, his ego collapsing under the weight of the moment. And then, for the first time all night, the crowd began chanting in unison, "Respect, respect, respect." Chuck placed a hand on the young martial artist's shoulder before leaving the arena. Seagal stood alone in the center, drowning in the noise of a crowd that had once admired him. Tonight, Chuck Norris didn't just win a confrontation. He won the entire room. Without the arena was still shaking from the chants of respect, respect, respect. Chuck Norris had left the center floor, walking calmly toward the exit like the warrior philosopher he'd always been. Steven Seagal, however, stood frozen in place, sweating, breathing hard, humiliated but refusing to accept it. He muttered to himself, "This isn't over. I'll show them. I'll show all of them." But what Seagal didn't realize was that the night had one final twist waiting for him, and it would be the biggest blow to his image yet. As the legendary martial arts elder who stepped in earlier attempted to usher Seagal away from the crowd, suddenly a group of people pushed forward through the audience. They weren't fans. They were former stuntmen, martial artists, and production crew members who had once worked with Seagal. Faces that Seagal recognized. Faces he wished he didn't recognize. One of the stuntmen lifted his voice. "Steven, You going to tell them the truth? The crowd instantly erupted again. Cameras turned, lights pointed directly at Seagal. He looked trapped, cornered by ghosts from his own past. Seagal tried to ignore them and walk away, but another voice sliced through the arena. Tell them how you treated us. Tell them how you bullied your own stunt team. Murmurs spread across the stadium like wildfire. Chuck Norris, who had already reached the entrance, paused. He turned around, watching. One stuntman stepped forward, a man in his 40s with a scar on his cheek. He spoke with a shaking voice, not from fear, but from years of bottled-up anger. You used to hit us for real, Steven. Not rehearsed hits. Real ones. You humiliated guys half your size to make yourself look tough. The crowd gasped. Seagal's eyes widened, not with guilt, but with pure rage. Lies, he spat. You're making this up to embarrass me. But that's when another stuntman stepped forward. Then another. Then another. 3 men. All with stories. All with receipts. Tell them how you broke my rib just because I corrected your stance. Tell them how you refused to work unless everyone called you master. Tell them how you insulted other martial arts and said nobody was on your level. Seagal's face turned pale. The arena shook with whispers. Chuck Norris remained silent, watching with the quiet wisdom of a man who had seen arrogance destroy many fighters over the years. Suddenly, the loudspeakers crackled. A video appeared on the giant screen above the stage. The crowd gasped. It was old behind-the-scenes footage someone had uploaded onto the arena system. The clip showed a younger Seagal on a film set, yelling at a stuntman, shoving him, mocking him in front of everyone. And then, something even worse. Seagal punched the stuntman in the stomach, hard, then smirked as the poor guy fell to the floor. The arena went silent. Then, boom, a wave of boos exploded from every corner. Seagal's face burned with humiliation. He pointed at the screen, shouting, "That was edited. That was fake. Turn that off." But the damage was done. Chuck Norris stepped forward, walking back toward the center of the arena. Every camera turned to him. Every pair of eyes followed him. When he reached Seagal, he didn't yell. He didn't gloat. He didn't try to embarrass him further. He simply said, "Steven, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is why nobody respects you. Not because of your movies. Not because of your age. But because of how you treat people." Seagal swallowed hard, trembling with anger, but not one word came out. Chuck continued, speaking loud enough for the whole arena. A martial artist isn't measured by strength. He's measured by character. The crowd cheered like thunder. Seagal felt the world closing in on him. His ego, the thing he cherished most, was collapsing in front of millions. He tried to speak, but the words got stuck. He tried to defend himself, but the truth was too heavy. He tried to walk away, but the arena roared with a chant that made him freeze. Chuck was right. Chuck was right. Chuck was right. Chuck put a hand on Seagal's shoulder, not in friendship, but in final judgment. "Steven, tonight wasn't about a fight. It was about a lesson, and you needed it." Seagal's eyes softened, for the first time that night, replaced not with rage, but with shame. The martial arts elder stepped beside Chuck and said, "Leave with dignity while you still can." Seagal finally lowered his head. He turned and walked out of the arena without saying a single word. The crowd erupted in applause, celebrating not violence, but the victory of humility over arrogance. Backhand index pointing down if you believe respect matters more than reputation. Type respect in the comments. And tell me, which country and city are you watching from? The moment Steven Seagal slipped out of the arena, head down, shoulders heavy, the energy inside the stadium transformed. What was once tension and conflict had evolved into celebration, not of violence, not of victory, but of character. Chuck Norris stood in the center of the floor, calm as ever, acknowledging the cheering crowd with a humble nod. He never acted like a winner. He never gloated. He simply breathed in the atmosphere as if to remind everyone. Real strength is quiet. Real respect is earned. Real warriors lead by example. The legendary martial arts elder placed a hand on Chuck's arm before whispering, "You handled tonight perfectly. Not many men could have." Chuck simply replied with a soft smile, "We don't grow by hurting others. We grow by correcting them." Those words would soon go viral. As Chuck exited the arena, hundreds of fans rushed to the railings, shouting his name, reaching out for high fives, chanting, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" And for the first time all night, Chuck raised both hands and waved, giving them a moment they'd never forget. Globe with meridians, the internet explodes. Within 10 minutes, clips of the confrontation were everywhere. Twitter exploded. Hashtag Chuck versus Seagal. Hashtag respect over ego. Hashtag Chuck won without punching. Instagram Reels, TikTok edits, YouTube Shorts. Every platform was flooded. One of the most viral clips was Chuck saying, "A real fighter knows when not to fight." People stitched it into motivational videos, leadership talks, even school assemblies. Within an hour, that line alone had millions of views. Meanwhile, the leaked footage of Seagal mistreating stuntmen spread even faster. Public opinion shifted brutally. Comments everywhere read, "Seagal exposed. Chuck was right all along. Ego destroys, respect builds." Even famous fighters and martial artists chimed in. Georges St-Pierre, Michael Jai White, Donnie Yen, all praising Chuck for his composure and leadership. One post went mega viral. "Tonight, Chuck didn't defeat Seagal. Seagal defeated himself." Chart decreasing, Seagal faces consequences. By the next morning, the backlash had begun. Studios released statements distancing themselves. Old stunt teams came forward with their own stories. Talk shows and podcasts lit up with debates like, "Is Steven Seagal finished?" Even Seagal's longtime fans struggled to defend him. Journalists tried contacting him for interviews, but he refused to speak. Sources close to Seagal claimed he stayed locked in his hotel room, furious, humiliated, and refusing to watch any videos from the event. One insider revealed, he didn't expect the world to side with Chuck. He thought people feared him. He found out they didn't. Glowing star Chuck rises higher. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris woke up to something entirely different. A tidal wave of love and admiration. News outlets praised his maturity. Martial arts schools used him as an example of honor. Parents shared his quotes with their kids. People around the world sent him messages like, "You taught us all something tonight. Thank you for showing what real strength is." Respect always wins. Chuck posted only one message online. Short, humble, and powerful. Be kind. Be disciplined. Be better than who you were yesterday. It gathered millions of likes. Trophy the world chose its hero. By evening, the arena incident became the #1 trending story globally. News headlines everywhere read, "Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal without throwing a punch." Respect triumphs over ego. Chuck Norris leads by example. Even people who weren't fans of martial arts had an opinion. Schools discussed it. Sports analysts broke it down. Motivational speakers quoted